Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform dedicated to sharing breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the meats industry. On each episode, we will hear from meat specialists and professionals to talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, food safety, and so much more.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. Today, we have an excellent guest. We had plenty of questions from our listenership about water usage on the kill floor and on the processing floor. Welcome, Dr. Ty Lawrence.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. So it's been great, this conversation. This is we were going back and forth on some emails on water usage. Had some questions more specifically on the kill floor. How many gallons per head? Then we had some questions on also what to do with that gray water. So I think, but we're going to start out this conversation about, just generally speaking, I know you've done some work on water usage. So can you tell us some elaborate more on that as far as the water usage? Why is it important to have control over that in the meat plant?
Sure. So let's just begin with where most of our packers are, and that's through the central plains of our country. The bulk of the animals are slaughtered, particularly in the beef world, less or so to a degree in swine. And most of those slaughterhouses are just above and pulling directly from the Ogallala Aquifer, or maybe a secondary aquifer even below that. And so we know that water is a finite resource, and we continue to pull from those resources. And most of those aquifers have very little, if any, recharge, at least in the time frame of our life. I know there's places that the Ogallala Aquifer has a recharge at the rate of an inch a year. So we're not going to recharge that in any sort of time frame that's of value to us. So some of the research that we've done would suggest that your average beef processor will use 600 to 900 gallons per animal. Now that's not all just in the slaughter floor. That's in the entirety of the process. Although the slaughter floor would be a large user of that, particularly it would be greater than the fabrication of the animal. And the single biggest user is probably cleanup. Third shift or at least night shift cleanup. We're using a tremendous amount of water to cleanse the process between lots or between production days to achieve sanitation during the night, typically prior to the next run. So, but in the entirety, 600 to 900 gallons would catch most of the beef processors in America.
Well, and natural resources is always going to be a hot topic, and especially these days, it has become a pretty hot topic. And like you're saying, it's the fresh water that is that finite resource here in this country, and especially in that Ogallala. And for those out there listening, like Dr. Lawrence has already mentioned, kind of something that goes all the way, extends from Nebraska down into the Panhandle of Texas, where you do most of your work and research, and where you're based out of. Because of the concern with the natural resource usage, and because of that large volume of water that we're going through, can you give a little bit of background on to why we need to be using that amount of water, and what has been done in more recent times to kind of maybe adjust the amount of water we're using?
Sure.
In the process.
So if we look at the why, it's almost exclusively back to food safety.
Yeah.
So we add a new process, and for instance, years ago we would have washed the head with a hose. Well, then came a head wash, and we would have washed the carcass with a hose. Well, then came a carcass wash, and then we've added more and more and more washes, privy to the hurdle concept to improve food safety. And so with every new hurdle, generally we were using water in some form or fashion. It may have a chemical in it. It may be steam. But there's water use added almost exclusively in that realm. Let's take 180 sanitizers or sterilizers, for instance. They're overflow sterilizers. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, not all, the independent users on the slaughter floor, they adjust the volume to how much runover. and you'll see a decent amount of variance just in that, where someone might just have a subtle run over, and someone may have a very wasteful run over just to run their 180 sterilizer at their station.
And that's a knife cleaning sterilizer in between carcasses.
Amen.
Just quickly dip it in there. Yep.
Or the modern way would be to have a 2 or 3 knife system where you're using one knife and the other 2 or 3 are sitting in the sterilizer being heat treated to kill anything on the surface of that knife in between carcasses.
Right.
So, that's a great example. The head wash, the carcass wash, steam pasteurization, spray chill, all of that adds up. And the cooling systems themselves are big users of water. The refrigeration, ammonia, chilling systems. Again, I mentioned cleanup at night is a big user. And then when you add all of that up and divide by the number of animals you process in a day, you get the numbers that it just gave you.
Yeah. Well, and we also, in many of the very large plants, and we use spray chilling too, right? And that's going to have to be fresh, clean water. And for those out there listening in a smaller plant, if you're not familiar with spray chilling, it's literally just a misting of the carcass in the first few hours, dozen hours or so. And it's excellent for heat transfer, cools that carcass very well, great for food safety as a result. But it is a usage of water, right? And you've done some research on, especially like the carcass wash and the head wash. What are some of those steps or mechanisms that we can bring into the process that has curbed some of the water usage at those locations?
Sure. So I'll go back to when I started this work well over a decade ago. One of the things that we observed and then challenged the processors with was what I call just very basic, simple operations. So, for instance, when I started in this realm, we would go to a slaughterhouse, and between breaks and at lunch, you would find that equipment would still run.
Oh
So
my.
the water is overflowing for 15 or 30 minutes, and there are no animals going by. The head wash, the carcass wash, the spray chill, maybe not the spray chill per se here in this case, but the head wash and the carcass wash, the steam pasteurizer. In some plants, those things were running full tilt with no animals going through, no heads, no carcasses, nothing. And it was, when we get to asking questions, a lot of it was fear of it literally being turned back on because there had been an issue one time, and we turned the head wash off and it didn't come back on, and then it cost us so many minutes of downtime. So the policy was to never do that again. And we ran into that in more than one location. Is water's cheap or water's free? Why take the risk? Turn it on in the morning and you leave it on all day. And in some extreme cases, we observed those things running between shift change. And that's an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And over time, as you have those conversations and you ask the whys and you put some subtle challenges into those systems, people do change. But it wasn't overnight. And there's some very tough conversations to get people to think about the finite resources that we're trying to salvage.
Yeah. And I know for some folks that are like all last year and this year, they're starting a new plant, local beef slaughter facility or a pork slaughter facility. Some of the things that they have to consider, and I mentioned in the beginning that they have had some questions on water usage, but also just bringing up the lagoon. So you have to consider before even building is what are some of the methods to collect that water. Can you tell us more about that? You have to have I know there's some units that you have on site to because it's not like all the water I use I put it in the sewer. It's a process to that.
In a large system, it's going to be processed. So any major slaughterhouse today is either going to have a wastewater treatment facility on site, or they're going to be connected to a large city's system. And in many cases, you'll notice that over time, as a new plant has been built in a town, that the wastewater treatment is often part of the tax incentive to come to town. The community says, we'll build or rebuild or upgrade our wastewater facility to handle your new requirement. And so one of the keys to remember is we're typically applying first use potable water onto a carcass. There are some reuse systems, but they're they're minimal today. Is if we look at the industry as a whole, first use water is the primary use, and then we put that water back through our wastewater system, and we're removing solids, we're removing chemicals, we're getting it back to a standard where it can be pushed into a lagoon or land applied. But there are standards that have to be met for cleanliness of that water before you can release it out of your system, and that's very very much something to consider when you're building a new plant, and particularly one the size of most of our commercial processors.
Yeah, you need to be able to capture that. You need to be able to treat it before it goes back out. Any any overflow that if indeed it does occur, which hopefully it doesn't and is rare, that needs to be a very minimal impact on the environment around. And so a lot of things to consider that way. And that's kind of interesting. You mentioned, especially with the small regional plants like Francisco's mentioned that are coming online, there may be opportunities to team with the municipal water system to kind of overcome some of those challenges that may be occurring instead of just starting from square one.
Right. Yeah. Right. It would be extremely challenging to start from square one, and I would advise anyone that is in this realm to build a new plant, reach out to your local city, county, regional government, and A, you got to figure out what the rules are of that state and region, and B, what incentives can they provide you with to help you build your complex or upgrade your complex in their community. Yeah. Because that's definitely consideration. The water, not only that you draw, but also the wastewater that you put out.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is too, though, and even in the large plants, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in many cases, these are out in very rural areas that we actually have use for that wastewater, that gray water, for irrigation. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So in the Texas Panhandle and in Southwest Kansas, it's very common for that water to be collected in a large lagoon or lagoon-like system. And I say lagoon-like because there's a lot of packers that built near a playa lake. Oh. So they're collecting the water in a natural lagoon of sorts, or they might build a lagoon, and then they'll land apply that through a center pivot sprinkler, and they'll grow crops with that same water. So it's not single use on the animal and then put out into the environment. It's used in the process, treated, cleaned, put back into an earthen lagoon, either man-made or natural, and then land applied to grow another crop.
Full circle.
Very, very common to see that in the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I think we talk, I think it was Dr. Darte, or I forgot who he was. We talk about the water use, and I mean, especially those small folks that are taking maybe water from the well. What are some of the things like, hey, just if you're gonna be doing that, maybe you have a potable water system, or what are some of the things like they just pay attention to that, because that might cause some issues with, I mean, if we have some other molecules in the water,
minerals or other.
So for just USDA purview, it's got to be potable water that is free of coliform bacteria. That's step one. And then beyond that, think in the processing world, it would be much advantageous to have a soft water source rather than a hard water source particularly if you're making processed meats and doing anything that needed the addition of phosphates. Mm-hmm. That would be something for sincere consideration.
Yep. Nitrites as well is definitely something. Nitrites, nitrates, that are things that can be mixed into the water there. So what are your thoughts on, I was considering some of the additional ways of maybe we could minimize use of water, and we're not going to go completely away from it, as far as I can tell. Not in our lifetime anyway, but lower our usage. And I think of just simple fixes in home use of changing the head on a shower. Have we considered smaller, more high pressure water nozzles for cleaning, or has that already been implemented?
So, in a word, we've considered it, mm-hmm. and that we've done some research. You'll find 2 papers that we've published in Meat Science looking at that very scenario. One, we tested different nozzle types in a head wash system to see how we could maximize effectiveness of cleansing the head and minimize gross water use. Mm-hmm. And then in a second system, we implemented that same technology and thought process in a major slaughterhouse. And so we went in and worked with their team and their engineers and adjusted the nozzle pattern, adjusted the nozzle type, adjusted the pressure of the system, and we cut their wash use effectively in half.
Wow.
And that makes a big difference when you multiply that day over day, year over year. That's a major water savings for them.
And I think this is like a I don't know, a follow-up, but I'm deeply interested in what made you like study water usage. Was it brought up by a processor, or what made you study this?
So a couple of things. Number one, I'm a native of the Panhandle, and I grew up utilizing Ogallala water on the ranch that my family owns. And so I've understood since I was a young child how finite and important that water use is. I grew up a child of grandparents that went through the Dust Bowl, and so they ingrained in me the importance of conserving water in multiple uses. Add to that an Ogallala Water Initiative that was initiated by my university and department head. And so as a young faculty, not only did I have that training ingrained in me from my family, but my department head supported it wholeheartedly. And so I thought, that now's a perfect time to use my skill sets in meat science and marry that with the need for water conservation in our area.
Right.
And so we did.
Well, it's and this is a great point to many of the younger folks out there that may be listening that are early career or haven't quite begun their career, maybe still in undergraduate or graduate school. Look at the immense diversity that you can have of specialization within the meat sciences, and I would say water usage. If you know Dr. Ty Lawrence, water usage is one of the many specializations that you have, and we're definitely going to have you back for some of those other amazing topics that you could help us with. But just another great example of how diverse an industry this really is, and all the other aspects that we do need to consider. And that kind of led us a little bit into your background, but can you tell us a little bit more how you got involved in meat science?
I can. So I'll give you the longer story, and you can edit this as you
right.
need. So I'm a freshman at West Texas A&M, fall of 1993, and a young man comes in to the dorm. I cannot remember the young man's name. I don't know that I ever even saw him again. He was taking meat science at the time, and I'm a first semester freshman. He just bebops into the dorm, and he's got his knives with him. He's got his knives. He's got his scabbard. He just got out of lab, and he is excited about meat science and all this and da 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 and this and that, and he's just telling me all the details. So I'm so enthralled by what he's saying. I go to the class catalog, the course of classes, and I look and I see where meat science is in my degree plan, and I realize I'll take that as a junior. Well, I'm a first semester freshman, and for those of you that know me, patience is not a virtue that the good Lord gave me, and so I'm thinking, well, I've got to figure out how to get in here. And so I go to Dr. Montgomery's office. Dr. Montgomery was the sole meats professor at West Texas. He was the initial guy. And I go to his office and I say, "Hey, I want to get into this class." And he kind of looks at me and he pulls his glasses down and he says, "What do you need me for? Just enroll." And I said, "Well, I'm a freshman, and I need your permission to take it." And it's a process we called blue carding then and still today. Anyway, long story short, he doesn't want to do that. He says, "Just take it when you're a freshman. Go away, kid." And I'm a pretty persistent young man at the time. Not that I'm not today, but anyway, I go back and I go back and I go back, and I think I had to go to his office 6 or 7 or 8 times before I finally wore him down to the point he would allow me to take that class as a freshman, second semester freshman.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I got in. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Just as much as the young man that came by the dorm that day loved it. And as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah. And so in West Texas A&M, which is where you are currently on faculty.
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
Well, so let me again. So that was second semester of my freshman year, and then I go home for the summer for the last time, and I come back. Dr. Montgomery hires me as a sophomore, my first week of school, and I help him TA classes in TA labs. I'm working with him at the Beef Carcass Research Center, and I stay there. And about the time I'm a senior, he says, well, you need to start thinking about grad school. And so I stay and do a master's with Dr. Montgomery in the realm of dentition and carcass maturity. And then we get done there, and I'm thinking, well, now what? And he says, well, you clearly need a PhD. And so I go and interview at multiple schools. And my second mentor, whom I have the privilege of presenting an award to tomorrow night, he's the one that I chose. And I went to Kansas State. And Dr. Dykeman was clearly my advisor, but I do have the privilege of being able to say that at the time there were 8 faculty of meat science when I was a student there. Wow. And I worked with all 8 of them. And that was one of my goals, is to, ingrain myself in all of them as much as they put into me. Yeah. And I was fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah. No.
And after Kansas State, had an opportunity to go work with Doug Sutton and Angie Siemens at Smithfield Foods. Okay. And I went and did that. I was there for 2 years. And I would probably still be there today had it not been for WT calling and saying, you might want to think about coming home and taking over this program.
That's awesome. And what a privilege. And I didn't realize you had the industry experience, which probably makes you such an effective educator and researcher and everything. And I applaud you for that. And thank you for sharing your story.
My pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you a lot for your time. I think when you brought up the K-State, before recording, I asked you, because I hear a lot of stories, and I really
good stories. I hope
good stories, and I'm jealous because you had to work with Dr. Croft, Dr. Kasner, Unruh. I think it was beginning of that time.
Oh yeah,
Dr. Unruh, Dykeman, Dr. Hunt. So pretty. Well-rounded.
Yeah.
All the legends in meat science. Well, thank you again for joining us today, and hopefully we have you back sometime soon.
Be my pleasure. Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Thank you.